Imagine this. In the summer of 1879, in a stifling town deep in the Mississippi Delta, an 11-year-old black boy was given enough poison to drop a grown man. He swallowed it and simply did not die. That is not folklore. It exists in fragments: a hospital ledger, a doctor's letter that never reached print, a witness statement written years later by a trembling hand. But before the paper trail fades into myth, picture the moment itself. The room was small, the air thick with carbolic acid and sweat. Flies tapped against the narrow window. A kerosene lamp buzzed over a scarred wooden table where Dr. Jonathan Caldwell adjusted his spectacles. Beside him stood pharmacist Harlan Briggs, 2 plantation men in linen coats, and a pale young intern, ready with a notebook. Behind the boy loomed a guard, whose silence said more than any chain. Nathaniel Reed sat straight, small for his age, bare feet flat on the splintered floor. His wrists were unbound, but freedom had no business here. On the table before him stood a glass, half filled with a syrupy liquid, what Caldwell later described as a non-lethal experimental dose. In truth, it was strychnine disguised in sweet tonic. "Swallow it, boy, all of it," the doctor said. Nathaniel obeyed. The men leaned forward. They expected spasms, gasping, the ugly spectacle of a convulsion. The intern's pencil hovered, ready to record typical symptoms in Negro subject. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The clock ticked like a hammer in a coffin shop. The boy sweated from the heat, not from fever. His breathing stayed even, his eyes clear. Caldwell touched his wrist. Pulse elevated, he murmured. Pupils reactive. No rigidity. He frowned, glancing at the mixture. If the dose was correct, expected severe reaction. Either the preparation failed, or the boy is not reacting in any manner consistent with known physiology. "Maybe he's fakin'," one planter said. "Give him more," muttered another. "Not yet," Caldwell answered, eyes narrowing with a curiosity sharper than mercy. "We observe. We document." Nathaniel sat still, feeling the room watch him like a trap about to spring. Inside, a burning warmth climbed his throat, spread through his chest, then ebbed away as if something had entered him and found no place to hold. The fire passed, leaving a strange lightness, a ringing in his ears like far-off thunder. He looked up. "Can I have water, sir?" The request, quiet and ordinary, cracked the tension like a dropped dish. The intern blinked, uncertain whether to pour or to flee. Caldwell nodded. The boy drank, hand steady. Outside, the Delta storm gathered, the kind that drags its heat across the land until even the insects fall silent. The men signed their names in neat, deliberate strokes, sealing a record they would later wish erased. Caldwell wrote one last note that night. Subject tolerated ingestion without incident. Possible anomaly in metabolic resistance. Further trials recommended. He underlined the final words twice. In the hallway, one of the planters muttered, "You sure that's natural, doctor? Maybe the devil's guarding him?" Caldwell replied without looking up. "If so, gentlemen, the devil has chosen a most useful instrument." The lamp hissed, its flame bending with the draft. Somewhere below, rats scurried between crates marked Caldwell Drug and Sundries. Upstairs, thunder rolled across Sunflower County. That night marked the first time Nathaniel Reed's body was measured in ounces and seconds, as if the mystery of his survival could be weighed like sugar or arsenic. It would not be the last. For the men in that room, curiosity had already begun to taste like hunger. And from that, hunger would grow an experiment that Mississippi would later try to erase from every record it owned. Minutes after the test ended, Nathaniel was led out to the hospital yard, a patch of cracked dirt behind the pharmacy, where barrels leaked rainwater and the smell of bleach clung to the walls. 2 black orderlies watched him from a distance, whispering. One said, "They dosed that boy again." The other shook his head. "He don't even look sick." Years later, that same man would tell a WPA interviewer what he saw that day. A colored child that swallowed death and kept walking. If you think this sounds like superstition, remember, there are written traces. In a letter dated October 1879, Dr. Jonathan Caldwell described a colored miner exhibiting unexplained resistance to toxins. The Mississippi State Medical Society's minutes mention briefly an unusual case of poison tolerance. And in the Freedmen's Bureau archives, the name Reed family, Sunflower County appears with a note. Boy, age about 11, in medical observation. Then the record goes quiet. Before we go further, let's step back. If you're listening tonight, I want you to think of your own family stories. Every southern county has them. Tales of people too tough to die, who outlived fevers, bullets, whiskey, and bad water. Maybe you've heard of one. Drop a comment. Tell me what your elders said. Because sometimes, the line between miracle and memory is thinner than a page. Now, understand, this isn't just the story of a boy who could drink poison and live. It's the story of a system built on the belief that black bodies were fragile, disposable, and controllable. And what happens when one boy's body refused to obey? In 1879, Mississippi's white physicians called themselves men of science. They believed every sickness could be cataloged, every difference measured. Yet when Nathaniel Reed sat before them and refused to die on schedule, their science began to tremble. His endurance didn't fit any known rule of anatomy, and that was dangerous, because it meant the hierarchy they trusted might be built on sand. Caldwell's private notes tell us how far his fascination went. He wrote to a colleague in New Orleans, "Subject's physiology inconsistent with expected response. Consider repeated trials under supervision." He never published that letter. The next time his handwriting appears, half the page is torn away. By cross-checking the fragments, we can glimpse the pattern. There's the church register in Greenville, summer 1879, giving thanks for a deliverance from illness in our community. There's the plantation ledger noting that Hannah Reed, sharecropper, was absent 2 days tending to sick child returned from town. And finally, a line in an 1880 census where the Reeds vanish altogether. Something happened in that gap. The last complete sentence in Caldwell's log reads, "Final examination scheduled." The rest was ripped out. Now, why would that matter to the people in power? Because if you admit that a black boy's body could resist what killed white men, then your entire justification for dominance, your science of difference, starts to crumble. A child like Nathaniel was not a miracle to them. He was a threat to the natural order they had written into law. I've read enough of these archives to tell you, every time such a body appeared, too strong, too smart, too enduring, the record either twisted it into pathology or erased it completely. That is why you won't find Nathaniel's name in any medical journal, only in footnotes, gossip, and memory. But to follow his story, we have to go back a decade, to the mud fields that once bore the name Reed Plantation, and to the night a midwife whispered over a newborn who refused to die. She would later tell a WPA interviewer, "I held babies that the world poisoned. Hunger, fever, hate. But this one, the world looked like it couldn't poison him back." What did she mean by that? To understand, we must return to the years just after the war, when freedom was a word on paper and the land still breathed sickness. There, on poisoned soil, the boy who wouldn't die first opened his eyes. By 1868, the war was over on paper, but out by the swamps between Vicksburg and Greenville, The Reed place looked much as it always had. The big house still stared over the fields. The cabins still leaned into the damp wind. Only the contracts were new. Sharecropping agreements written in heavy ink that tied black families to the same soil that had owned them before. Hannah Reed signed hers with an X. She had picked cotton under Colonel Jeremiah Reed and now rented his land from his son. Her surname was his. Her freedom, like the paper, was thin. That summer, she carried another child. 2 babies before had not lived to see their first cold snap. Fever, bad water, summer complaint. The white doctor had a different name each time. For Hannah, it was just the same small weight leaving her arms too early. When the pain started, again in the one-room cabin that backed onto the drainage ditch, she tried not to hope. The night was close and wet. Mosquitoes whined against the torn mosquito netting. The air smelled of stale sweat and stagnant ditch water. Aunt Lottie, the old midwife who had delivered children on Reed land since before the war, shuffled in with her bundle of rags and roots. "This room's seen too many babies gone," she muttered, tying a cloth around her hair. "Ground here sour." Outside, Isaac, Hannah's husband, back from serving in the colored troops with a bad knee and no pension, paced in the mud, listening to each choked sound from inside. Hours crawled. Hannah burned, shook, drifted in and out as the contractions pulled her under. At one point, the midwife wiped her brow and whispered, "If you can't stay, girl, don't fight so hard." She had learned to speak softly to the dying. When the child finally slipped free, he was limp, cord looped once around his neck, skin a washed-out blue. For a breath, the room felt like all the others. Too late, too quiet. "Not again," Hannah rasped. Aunt Lottie pressed 2 fingers to the tiny chest. Nothing. She was already reaching for the cloth to cover his face when the boy jerked, mouth opening in a long, thin gasp. Air rushed in as if some hand had pushed it. His color darkened, not to rosy pink, but to a steady brown. He did not wail. He simply drew breath after breath, slow and regular, as if reclaiming his place. Hannah's hand found his back. "You stay," she whispered. "You hear me? You don't go nowhere." Later, in old age, Lottie would tell an interviewer, "I seen plenty babies where the world poisoned them before they come. That one looked like the poison bounced off." The months that followed did nothing to quiet that feeling. That year, the ditch behind the cabins went bad. Something from the fields leached into the water. Even the mules refused to drink. Children doubled over with cramps. People whispered, "Malaria," "bad spirits," "army sickness." Hannah herself shivered with chills, teeth rattling, eyes glassy. The baby, Nathaniel, drank from the same bucket, chewed on the same damp rags. He spat up once, fussed, then slept through the night. By morning, he sat propped on a folded quilt, watching dust in the shaft of light, gaze too steady for a child not yet walking. When he was barely old enough to toddle, he grabbed at a bar of lye soap cooling on a board outside. Before anyone saw, he had bitten off a pale corner. Hannah snatched it away, heart dropping. She had watched a little girl down the road die like that, throat burned raw. They waited for the screaming, for the bloody foam, for the panicked run to town. He gagged at the bitterness, drooled, cried for a few minutes. His tongue reddened. Then he crawled to the doorway and fell asleep with his cheek on the warm plank. By nightfall, he was tugging at Hannah's skirt, asking in his small way to be picked up. Aunt Lottie examined his mouth with gnarled fingers. "Soap got no home in him," she said. "Slides right off." Some women in the quarters took it as a sign. "Maybe the Lord paying you back, Hannah," one said softly, "for the 2 he took." Others made small gestures when he was near, touching charms, turning their palms inward. "If nothing sticks to him," an old man muttered, "something else is carrying it." Years later, in a Greenville hospital, Caldwell would jot in a margin, "Mother reports multiple incidents in early childhood involving ingestion of noxious substances without sustained harm." Back in 1868, no one wrote anything. They just watched to see whether this child would follow the others into the little patch of graves by the tree line. He did not. Through the sickly summers of the early 70s, he kept on his feet while other children wasted. Water that laid grown men low ran through him like a bad dream he could not quite remember. One evening, Isaac came back from town with a folded paper cone from the white druggist, a cheap fever powder the man swore by. "They say it keeps young ones strong," he told Hannah. "World full of sickness. Maybe this helps." She turned the packet over, smelling the sharp, metallic tang. Her stomach tightened. It felt like standing again over that light soap, waiting. "World already tried to poison him," she said. "Maybe this is just its Sunday clothes." Still, when Nathaniel's forehead grew warm a week later, she stirred the powder into water and lifted the cup to his lips, torn between terror and a thin, stubborn hope. The medicine should have knocked him flat. By dawn, he was walking in the yard, head a little heavy, eyes clear, as if he'd drunk nothing stronger than rain. From such small, grim trials, a legend began to form among the cabins, a boy the land could not finish. And somewhere beyond the fields, a man in a white coat would soon hear just enough of that legend to decide it needed to be tested. By the early 1870s, nothing on the old Reed place had truly changed except the calendar. Colonel Reed was dead. His son Thomas wore the title now, calling himself farmer instead of master. The people in the cabins signed papers instead of wearing chains. Yet the same cotton rows waited. The same swamp air clung to their skin. One summer, the only good well for the quarters began to turn. The bucket came up with a faint red sheen, and the water smelled faintly of metal and eggs. Folks complained. The white overseer, Mr. Collier, waved it off. "Groundwater's a little stirred, that's all. Boil it if you're scared." They boiled it. It didn't help. Children curled on pallets with cramping bellies. Men staggered from the fields to crouch behind the sheds. 2 babies in the far row stopped crying altogether. Hannah watched Nathaniel drink from the same bucket. He vomited once behind the cabin, wiped his mouth on his arm, then stood squinting at the sky as if something distant were calling him. By the next day, he was trotting after Isaac again, a little slower, but upright. "Boy's made out of something else," one woman whispered, fanning herself beside the door. "Or something's riding him," another answered. Winter brought another test. Reed Jr. issued the yearly rations, sacks of meal and barrels of salt pork, already turning gray at the edges. The smell clung to the cabins no matter how long they boiled the meat. People ate because there was nothing else. That night, Hannah's neighbor Martha woke to the sound of her son gasping, eyes wild, hands clawing at his throat. By morning, he was still. 3 cabins down, a whole family lay in a feverish heap. Nathaniel had eaten from the same pot. He felt dizzy, lay flat on the floorboards for a while, then sat up and reached for more cornbread. "Lord, if you're going to keep him clean," Hannah murmured, half prayer, half warning. Not everyone wanted him that close. Some mothers pulled their little ones away when he wandered near. "Don't let your child share cups with that boy," an old man advised. "If poison won't sit in him, where you think it goes?" Around 5 years old, Nathaniel began to notice the pattern himself. If there was bad meat, he could tell by the way his tongue tingled before he swallowed. Bitter medicine tasted different to him, too, like rust heating on a stove. It scared him, and drew him at the same time, the way a fire draws a cold hand. One afternoon, a group of older boys found a dusty bottle behind the storehouse with a crude skull stamped on the label. They could not read the words, "rat poison," but they understood the picture. "Bet it's just strong salt," one laughed. He dabbed a few grains on his tongue, coughed, spat, doubled over with watering eyes. Another tried to show he was braver, and within an hour he was curled in the dirt, stomach twisting. When they shoved the bottle toward Nathaniel, he hesitated. The smell from the neck was sharp and metallic, wrong in a way he couldn't name. Still, shame is its own kind of pressure. He tipped a pinch onto his tongue. It burned like pepper dipped in iron. For a moment his throat clenched, his eyes blurred. He spat and drank from the trough until the taste thinned. By evening, the boy who had swallowed less lay groaning in his mother's lap, while Nathaniel walked about with only a lingering heat in his chest and a bone-deep weariness. Aunt Lottie pulled him aside that night. "You don't play with what takes lives," she scolded softly. "It may slide off you, but it don't leave this world empty." He lay awake on his pallet, listening to Martha's boy moan through the wall, and wondered if some part of that white powder was still moving around inside, him looking for a place to land. The next day, in the shade behind the cabins, Martha said to another woman, voice low and ragged, "Nate can swallow what kills other folks. It just won't stick." She didn't know Mr. Collier was close enough to hear. He stopped, half-stepped past the corner, the words catching like a hook. "That's so?" he said, too lightly. "Which boy is that?" That was the moment the story slipped out of the quarters and into the ledger books, a small remark carried toward men who measured people the way they measured acreage and yield. Mr. Collier didn't forget the name. Within a week he mentioned it to Thomas Reed, Jr., while they sat on the veranda tallying debts and cotton weights. "Seems you got yourself a boy on this place who can drink half the pharmacy and walk away." Reed gave a dry chuckle, the kind that never reached his eyes. "There's always a tale or two out in the cabins. They talk to make themselves feel special." "Maybe," Collier said, but one of the women swore he took poison straight to the tongue. That was enough to plant a seed. Not long after, sickness hit the white part of town. A farmer's family fell ill after drinking a patent tonic bought from the druggist on Main Street. Word spread fast. "Bad batch," people said. To calm the gossip, Reed called in Dr. Jonathan Caldwell from Greenville, a man known for his calm hands and sharper curiosity. Caldwell arrived on a hot afternoon, his buggy coated with road dust. He examined the surviving bottles, sniffed the thick syrup, frowned. "Strychnine in excess," he concluded. "Not intentional, but dangerous. You'd best recall every vial." Then Collier, remembering, said, "We got a colored boy on the place. Took tonics and such. Never seemed touched. Might be worth seeing." Caldwell's brows lifted. "What age?" 10, maybe 11. "Healthy otherwise?" "Never seen him take sick." The doctor closed the case on his instruments. "Show him to me." They found Nathaniel chopping kindling behind his mother's cabin. The boy straightened, wary. Caldwell spoke kindly, a city voice smooth as polished glass. "Your mother says you've had medicines before. Would you take a little for me? Nothing harmful. Just to see how it sits with you." Hannah stepped forward. "Sir, he ain't sick." "I know, ma'am," Caldwell said, offering a small smile. "This is simple observation. We'd like to understand why he stays so strong. Could help others." The phrase "help others" loosened her guard. She had seen too much of the world not to crave some mercy. She nodded once. Caldwell poured a measured spoonful of the tonic, the same one that had near killed the farmer's boy. Nathaniel swallowed, grimaced at the bitterness. The doctor watched the pulse in his throat, the twitch of his eyelids. Minutes passed. The heat pressed down. Nothing happened. Feel dizzy? Caldwell asked. No, sir. Just hot. The doctor noted it in his book. Mild discomfort only. When they left, Collier said, You think he's fakin'? Caldwell shook his head. No. Something's different in him. Possibly metabolic. Possibly divine, if you ask the preacher. He smiled slightly. But I don't ask preachers. By Sunday, the story had reached Reverend Samuel Pierce. His sermon that morning turned strange, all thunder and caution. Sometimes the enemy grants endurance, he said, pacing the pulpit, so that we might mistake corruption for strength. The white congregation nodded solemnly. The black members sitting in the back pews heard the warning for what it was, danger aimed at one of their own. That afternoon, Hannah found two women whispering near her steps. One said, White folks got their eye on your boy. The other crossed herself. They'll call him a sign, then make him a specimen. At dusk, Nathaniel sat outside, staring at the swamp light flickering beyond the fields. Mama, why they keep watching me? Because they don't understand you, she said, pulling him close. And what people don't understand, they try to fix or break. In Greenville that same night, Dr. Caldwell wrote to Reed Jr., Subject tolerates suspected compound with no ill effect. Recommend limited hospital observation. Arrangements can be made discreetly. The mother need not accompany him. Supervision provided. Reed's reply came 2 days later. Approved. He'll do as told. The boy dreamed that week of walls white as bone, of bottles lined up like soldiers. When the wagon came for him, Hannah's hands trembled on his shoulders. They said, It's just for a few days, she whispered. Yes, ma'am, he said, though something inside him had already gone cold. For the men in charge, it was a study. For his mother, it was the sound of another chain disguised as mercy. The road to Greenville was a ribbon of dust and heat. Nathaniel rode in the back of the wagon between sacks of cottonseed and a wooden crate marked medical supplies. Reed Jr. sat up front with the driver, talking of weather and credit as if there were no child behind them at all. At the hospital, everything was hard edges and whitewash. A sign by the side entrance read, Colored Ward. They led him through it into a narrow room that smelled of lime and old sweat. Iron beds lined the walls. Men lay on them with bandaged limbs, sunken cheeks, eyes turned to the ceiling as if expecting no answer. A young black woman in a plain dress and apron met them at the door. Lila Jenkins, she said, when Caldwell called her name. She looked Nathaniel over the way older women in the quarters did, counting bones and shadows, not just pulse. This the boy? She asked quietly. This is the patient, Caldwell corrected, already reaching for his notebook. He'll be staying a few days. Routine observation. Routine. Nathaniel had heard that word before. It never belonged to people like him. They checked his weight, his heartbeat, his reflexes. Lila wrapped the cuff around his thin arm and squeezed the bulb, listening. Strong, she said, more to him than to the doctor. That evening, Caldwell brought in a small labeled bottle and poured a measured dose into a glass. This is a stimulant, he explained, his tone almost gentle. It helps the heart. You've had something like it before. Nathaniel glanced at Lila. She gave him the faintest nod, though her fingers tightened on the tray. He drank. The liquid burned on its way down, spreading a metallic heat through his chest. His hands trembled, but his breath held steady. Caldwell noted the flush in his cheeks, the quickened pulse, then underlined a single sentence. No convulsions. No collapse. In the next bed, an older man received a similar stimulant from another hand. That night, Nathaniel woke to the sound of thudding fists and strangled cries. Orderlies rushed in. A body arched, twisted, then sagged. Sheets were pulled over a face. By dawn, the bed was empty, the floor scrubbed. Lila found Nathaniel staring at the bare mattress. "He took what I took," he whispered. "He died." "I didn't." She studied his eyes. "Doesn't mean you safe," she said softly. "Just means death got confused." On the second day, Caldwell brought a different mixture, cloudy in the glass. "What's that?" Lila asked. "A very low preparation. Arsenic. Carefully diluted," he answered. "I need to know whether the pattern holds." Nathaniel's tongue recoiled from the taste before it reached his throat. He swallowed anyway. A wave of nausea hit. The room tilted. He retched into the basin, eyes watering. Lila held his shoulders, murmuring under her breath words that were not in any medical text. Hours later, the worst had passed. His stomach was empty, his body exhausted. But he was still there. Caldwell watched him sit up, slow but sure. "Incredible," the doctor breathed. "Transient distress only. No lasting damage." Again. That night, Nathaniel lay awake, feeling his own skin as if it belonged to someone else. It was as though every poison they poured into him tried to anchor itself and slid away instead, leaving a residue of heat and shame. He thought of the nameless man whose bed now stood bare. If I can carry what kills them, he wondered, why can't I take it away from them instead? There was no one to answer. The building hummed in the dark, the rattle of carts, the far-off moan of another patient. Somewhere down the hall, Caldwell dipped his pen in ink, writing neat lines about idiosyncratic resistance and valuable opportunity. On the last page of that week's entries, he added, almost to himself, "Subject should be presented to society under controlled conditions." The word presented sat on the paper like a verdict. For Nathaniel, it would mean one thing. This was not the end of the trials. It was only the opening act. Caldwell did not send Nathaniel home. "A few more days," he told Reed Jr. in a tidy letter, "for thoroughness." Days bled into weeks. The boy's world shrank to the colored ward, the corridor, and a small back room where bottles lined the shelves like a glass army. Labels in looping script, strychnine, belladonna, laudanum, carbolic, stared down at him whenever he sat on the wooden stool. The tests changed shape but not purpose. One morning, Caldwell set out 3 glasses, one clear, one amber, one almost black. "Different preparations," he said. "We'll start mild." Nathaniel's hands curled in his lap. "Do I have to, sir?" The doctor paused, as if considering the question. "You're helping us understand what harms people," he replied. "That's a kind of service." Lila stood by with a cloth and basin, jaw clenched. The first dose tasted of cheap whiskey and iron. Heat bloomed in his chest, crawled up his neck. His heart slammed so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. For a few minutes he shook, teeth chattering though sweat ran down his back. Then the storm eased, leaving him washed out but whole. "Note," Caldwell said, eyes bright. "Tachycardia, tremor, recovery without seizure." The next day, it was belladonna syrup in a smaller spoon. Colors sharpened around the edges. The gas lamp flared too bright. Nathaniel's mouth went dry, thoughts scattered like straw in wind. And yet, as the hours passed, his sight cleared. He slept, woke, walked. Sometimes Lila would catch him pressing a hand to his own skin, as if looking for cracks. "What's it feel like in there?" she asked once, quietly. "Like something hunting for a place," he answered after a long pause. "Cold and hot at the same time. Then it just slips off, leaves the walls buzzing." He had no other language for it. In the evenings, the other black staff whispered in the laundry room. "They feedin' him all the devil's bottles," one orderly said. "And he's still breathin'," another replied. half awed, half afraid. Maybe he's the one carrying what should have killed the rest of us. Words seeped back to the Reed place through those same mouths. Hannah heard a woman say at the pump, "Your boy drinks whatever they put in front of him and keeps standin'." Another answered, "Then he's standin' between them and what they deserve." The thought made Hannah weak. At night she knelt on the packed dirt floor, palms flat, and prayed, "If you gave him something, Lord, don't let them use it till there's nothing left of him." Inside the hospital walls, Caldwell's tone shifted from cautious to hungry. His notes grew longer, more confident. Stronger dose tolerated. No organ failure observed. Subject could serve as reliable tester for suspect compounds. One afternoon, he dismissed Lila and the orderlies, saying he needed privacy for precision. Through the partially closed door, Lila later glimpsed Nathaniel swallowing a draft that smoked faintly in the glass. The boy doubled over, hands clamped to his stomach. Caldwell supported him, counting under his breath, watching the clock. Minutes later, the spasm let go. Nathaniel, pale and shaking, drew in slow air as if he had climbed out of deep water. Caldwell wrote, "Near threshold reaction, still reversible. Extraordinary." When Lila came back in, she dabbed his face. "They keep pushing," she murmured. "They'll find the edge." He stared at the ceiling. "Feels like they already did," he said, voice hoarse. "Only thing is, it moved." The poisons did not leave him untouched. He began to smell things others did not. Metal in clean water, bitterness in bread. Sometimes he woke from dreams where his veins were glass tubes, liquids running through them in different colors. On those mornings, he felt as though something inside him was not just enduring the doses, but learning them. At odd moments, he had flashes of someone else's weakness, a sudden heaviness in his legs, passing a wheezing man in the corridor, a stab under his ribs when a woman down the ward coughed blood. The sensations flickered and were gone, like sparks that failed to catch. "Boy, you all right?" Lila asked once when he grabbed the doorframe mid-step. "Somebody's sick," he whispered. "Everybody's sick in here." No, this was close. Then it went away. She did not know what to do with that, so she tucked it away like every other impossible thing the place had shown her. Caldwell, for his part, began to speak of Nathaniel not as a person, but as a resource. In a letter drafted to a colleague in Jackson, he wrote, "Should the society be willing, demonstration of this colored boy's resistance may prove of great interest and potential utility in safeguarding white patients from adulterated medicines." He sealed the envelope with a steady hand. For Reed Jr., the reply that came back was simpler. Dr. Caldwell invited to present unusual case at upcoming meeting. Bring subject if feasible. On the day Caldwell shared the news, he spoke as if offering Nathaniel an honor. "You'll be coming with me to Jackson," he said. "Important men will see what you can do." "Will that make me well?" the boy asked. "You're not ill?" the doctor replied. "You're exceptional." Nathaniel did not say what he was thinking, that every time someone called him exceptional, another bottle came off the shelf. That night, he dreamed of a long hall lined with strangers' faces, all watching as he lifted a glass. He woke with the taste of metal already in his mouth. The train whistle that would carry them toward Jackson had not yet sounded, but the track was laid. They met in the back room of Caldwell and Briggs, where the air smelled of alcohol and damp plaster. Shelves of powders and tinctures watched like a second audience as the men took their seats. Caldwell had laid out his notes, pages dense with measurements and calm phrases that did not match the unease in his eyes. Beside him sat Harlan Briggs, wiping his spectacles with a handkerchief. Thomas Reed Jr. leaned back, boot crossed over knee, while a neighboring landowner, and a county health man occupied the remaining chairs. "So," Briggs said, "you truly have a boy who can drink all this," he gestured at the bottles, "and walk out upright?" Caldwell tapped the notebook with a finger. "Not all, but more than should be survivable." Repeatedly. Reed gave a thin smile. "I didn't send him to you to brag. Question is, what's he worth?" The county man cleared his throat. "There's talk already. Some say a colored child nearly died in your ward. Some say you tried to poison him on purpose." "That is nonsense," Caldwell snapped. Then, more measured, "I am attempting to understand an anomaly. Properly handled, it could benefit everyone. Imagine being able to test suspect batches of medicine without endangering respectable patients." "Using him as a living gauge," Briggs said slowly. "Safer than risking white children, you mean?" Reed's eyes narrowed, calculating. "And if anyone on my place ever wanted to slip something into my glass, he'd be the one to taste it first." They were still talking when Reverend Samuel Pierce was brought in through the side door, collar straight, Bible tucked under his arm. "I hear," the preacher began, "that you intend to display a colored boy's unnatural hardiness before learned men." He looked at Caldwell. "You are sure you understand what spirit you're inviting?" "I understand a physiological curiosity," Caldwell replied. "Whatever tales his people tell about blessings or curses, we deal in flesh and blood here." Pierce's voice softened, but not kindly. "Flesh and blood belong to the Lord. If this boy endures, it must be framed as proof of God's sovereignty, not some challenge to his order. Too many already look for wonders in the wrong places." The county official shifted. "And we cannot have stories getting out that make Negroes seem superior stock. You know how fast such talk runs." In the end, they found their compromise. No names in print, no mention of experiments in detail, only a controlled case demonstration in Jackson. The boy would remain under Caldwell's authority. Reed would retain his labor on paper, and the preacher would be present to keep the narrative properly tamed. Outside the white circle, rumors crawled. In the Fortheim laundry yard behind the hospital, a porter told another, "Doctor, gonna take that child to Jackson, line him up like a mule at auction." On Reed land, Hannah heard that important men would see what her son could bear. Some whispered that if he came back, they should run him north. Others were afraid even to say his name too loud. If you're listening to this and thinking about hospitals you've known, I'd ask you, have you ever felt more like a test than a patient? Especially if you're black, or brown, or poor. Drop a line in the comments if that rings true. This isn't only ancient history, it's the soil from which a long mistrust grew. On the evening before departure, Lila found Nathaniel sitting on his bed, hands empty, eyes distant. "They say you going to Jackson," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She reached into her apron and drew out a small figure she'd stitched from scrap cloth and thread, a little man with crooked arms. "Here," she said. "Keep this in your pocket. When they stare at you, touch it. Remember there's folks who see you as more than what you can swallow." He closed his fingers around it, as if it were something solid in a world gone thin. Far away, trains clattered on their tracks, heading toward the capital. The next one would carry a boy whose body had become both commodity and shield, toward a room full of men, ready to see how close to the edge they could push him. The train to Jackson left Greenville before dawn, its whistle dragging a long, hollow note through the dark. Nathaniel sat near the rear in a car for colored passengers, wedged between a crate of instruments and a canvas trunk marked Dr. J. Caldwell. Beside him, Lila Jenkins kept her hands folded tight, though she had no written permission to travel. She told the porter she was attending the patient, and no one argued. Through the window, the field slid past like a single sheet of gray. At every jolt, The small cloth figure in Nathaniel's pocket brushed against his thigh, a pulse of something steady amid the motion. "You ever been to a big city?" Lila asked. He shook his head. "What's it like?" "Depends which door you're let through," she said. At the other end of the car, a pair of white orderlies laughed over a newspaper. One pointed at the boy. "That the Wonder?" The other smirked. "Doctor says he can eat thunder and spit lightning. We'll see." Jackson was already waking when they arrived. Cobblestone streets slick from night rain, mule carts clattering toward the market. The hospital hosting the society meeting rose 3 stories high, new brick and white pillars meant to impress visitors from New Orleans and Atlanta. To Nathaniel, it looked like a courthouse wearing a doctor's coat. Inside, a hall had been arranged with rows of chairs and the sharp smell of chemical polish. Tall windows leaked morning light across the polished floorboards. At the front stood a long oak table covered with glassware, scales, and neat rows of labeled bottles. Caldwell greeted a dozen men in starched coats and watch chains. They shook hands, curious but cautious, as if sharing some secret power. Reed Jr. lingered by the wall, hat in hand, pretending indifference, though he had traveled all this way to see what his investment could yield. "Gentlemen," Caldwell began, "I present to you a most singular case. A boy of color, approximately 12 years of age, exhibiting physiological resistance to toxins that would prove fatal in ordinary subjects." The words "ordinary subjects" hung in the air like dust motes. He motioned to Nathaniel, who stepped forward, palms sweating. Lila stood behind the curtain, unseen, gripping the edge of the fabric. "Begin with the standard tonic," Caldwell told his assistant. The man poured a clear dose into a glass and handed it over. Nathaniel drank. A ripple passed through the audience, interest, skepticism, a few thin smiles. After 10 minutes, Caldwell announced, "No reaction." The second glass waited. Amber, thicker. Belladonna extract, diluted 4-fold. Nathaniel's stomach clenched, but he lifted it to his lips anyway. Heat rushed through him. The world tilted and steadied. He heard one of the doctors whisper, "Impossible." Caldwell's voice rose, firm and proud. "Observe. Heart rate elevated, but stable. Breathing unlabored. You see? Resistance persistent." A third glass appeared, colorless again, but sharp in smell. Lila recognized the bottle from earlier weeks, arsenic preparation. She stepped from behind the curtain. "Doctor," she said, "that's enough." The room turned toward her, startled. Caldwell's smile thinned. "Miss Jenkins, your duty is attendance, not instruction." "He's still a child," Reed's voice cut through. "He's property until I say otherwise." Nathaniel's hands shook, the glass trembling between his fingers. Something inside him began to coil. Not fear this time, but a heat deeper than fever, rising from his spine to the back of his eyes. The murmuring of the room sounded far away. "I don't want to," he whispered. Caldwell leaned closer, voice low enough for only him to hear. "We've come too far for refusal, son. Drink." The boy obeyed. For a moment, nothing moved. Then his vision blurred white. His pulse hammered, then steadied. He set the empty glass on the table and lifted his head. "Still standing," someone said. But something had changed. He could feel the shape of every heartbeat in that room. The men's hearts fluttering like moths, Lila's racing with terror, Caldwell's ticking slow and measured. The poisons ran through him like threads of light, mapping veins, showing him where every fragile wall in their bodies waited to break. A glass somewhere cracked under its own weight. Reed's smile faltered. Caldwell was writing furiously, already framing the event for the journals he'd promised himself to publish. He didn't see the boy watching him. The look that was neither defiance nor defeat, but something older, unreadable. When the session ended, The men clapped politely, as if for a lecture that had gone slightly too long. Reed signed a paper confirming continued custody. Caldwell bowed, triumphant. Only Lila saw Nathaniel's hands trembling long after the others left. His skin glowed with a faint sheen of sweat, and the smell in the air had shifted, like metal and ozone after lightning. "What did they give you, child?" she whispered. He looked at her, eyes bright but distant. "All of them," he said, and something gave back. That night, the doctor's notes recorded successful demonstration. Subject unharmed. But the hospital's night nurse would later swear that when she passed the boy's door, she felt a sudden dizziness, a taste of iron on her tongue, and the unmistakable thought that something in the room was breathing the air she meant to keep for herself. Jackson talked for a few days. Not in the minutes of the medical society, of course. There, the entry was dry and neat. Presentation: colored youth with unusual tolerance to certain compounds. Discussion inconclusive. No recommendation. Nothing about the boy's eyes going bright and far away. Nothing about the feeling in the hall when he drank the third glass, and half the men present realized their own hearts were beating faster than his. The real talk happened in side rooms and porches, in sentences cut off when the wrong ears came near. A Negro child taking what would kill a grown man. Just a trick of dosage. Then why did my hand go numb watching him? 2 days after the meeting, a young assistant in the hospital laboratory collapsed while preparing a batch of cleaning solution. He'd worked with the same carbolic acid and arsenic compounds a dozen times. This time, his fingers slipped. A thin splash hit his bare skin. By morning, he was dead. Officially, it was carelessness compounded by weak constitution. Unofficially, more than one nurse muttered, "Ever since they brought that boy in here, death's been walking crooked." Caldwell refused to connect the dots. In his private journal he wrote, "Technician's death unfortunate, but unrelated. Must keep lines clear between genuine data and superstition." Still, he felt eyes on him wherever he went. The widows, the county mans, even Reed Jr.'s. On the buggy ride back toward Greenville, Reed sat stiff beside him. "You got what you wanted?" Reed asked. "I demonstrated a significant phenomenon," Caldwell replied. "If colleagues weren't ready to accept it, that's their failing." Reed's jaw tightened. "All I saw was a room full of white men feeling less safe in their own skin. That don't help me. I don't need a boy who makes folks question which bodies break first." There it was. Naked. Nathaniel's survival wasn't a marvel. It was an insult to the order of things. "So what do you propose?" Caldwell asked. "We keep him quiet," Reed said. "No papers. No more performances. You watch him if you must. But he sleeps on my land, under my say-so. And if ever this talk starts stirring up trouble..." He left the sentence hanging. Caldwell understood. Back in Greenville, the doctor sat at his desk with his notes spread before him. The line he had written in excitement, "material of inestimable value for testing," now looked different. Valuable things tempted thieves. Dangerous things drew scrutiny. On a fresh page he wrote, "Further public demonstrations inadvisable. Risk to professional standing and local order too great." Then, lower, almost squeezed between lines, "Subject to be observed in private only." Elsewhere, other pens moved. The secretary of the society recopied the Jackson minutes, leaving out any detail that hinted at doses and reactions. The death of the lab assistant was entered at the courthouse as sudden cardiac failure. In the church record, Reverend Pierce wrote a vague note about a solemn reminder of human frailty. No one put down, "We watched a black child outlast what our own could not." For Nathaniel, the erasure looked like something else. No more trips to the big hall, no more ring of faces. There was talk of sending him back to Reed Place for rest. The tests did not stop entirely. Small glasses now, quieter in back rooms. But the scale of the experiment shrank to fit the fear. He came home thinner, older around the eyes. Hannah wrapped her arms around him, careful as if he were made of cracked glass. "You done with them city doctors?" she asked. He hesitated. "They say they're done showing me," he answered. "Don't mean they're done using me." At night he dreamed of the Jackson Hall, of that moment when he felt every man's heartbeat laid out before him like bottles on a shelf. In the dark of the cabin, he pressed his hand to his own chest and whispered, "If you keep taking it, what's left that's mine?" Somewhere in Caldwell's journal, a later entry would read, "Final attempt. No further trials advisable." The page after that is gone, torn clean out. And after the summer of 1879, the name Nathaniel Reed goes missing from Sunflower County's records, as if the boy who swallowed poison had finally been taken by something the ledgers could not name. By the time anyone went looking for him on paper, the boy himself had been gone for more than 50 years. In the late 1930s, when the Depression pushed Washington to pay writers to dig through the country's memory, a young researcher named Harold Simmons sat in a chilly room at the Mississippi State Archives, turning pages no one had touched in decades. His assignment sounded dry. Historical notes on Negro health and medical care in the Delta. On one shelf, he found a thin stack of notebooks marked J. Caldwell, 1877, 1881. Most were filled with ordinary cases, fevers, childbirth, injuries from cotton gins. Then, in the middle of a volume labeled Poisonings, a different tone appeared. Case NR, colored boy, Reed Place, repeated tolerance to toxic agents, demonstrated before colleagues at society. Final attempt. No further trials advisable. After that line, the sheet had been ripped out so cleanly the binding showed. Simmons underlined the initials. In the margin of his own legal pad, he wrote, "Who? Where now?" He did what good researchers do. He looked sideways. County death registers for Sunflower and Greenville. No Nathaniel Reed listed. Census rolls for 1880. No boy of that name in any household near the old plantation. A Freedmen's Bureau report mentioning Reed sharecroppers relocated or lost to follow-up after 1880. The absence bothered him more than any gruesome clinical detail. Out in the field, the WPA was also sending people with notebooks into one-room shacks and church basements. When Simmons volunteered to sit in on some of those interviews, the past suddenly had a voice. A frail woman in Greenville, introduced as Lila Jenkins, told him about a boy they kept feeding bad stuff in the hospital, seeing how much he could take. Her hands shook as she spoke. "Name was Nate," she said. "From Reed Land. He drank things would kill a grown man. Every time he come back from the little room, he looked thinner and more tired, still breathing, but like the breath wasn't his no more." Another informant, a man who'd grown up on the plantation, recalled a half-whispered warning from his mother. "They took Hannah Reed's boy to town to see what he could stand. He stood too much. And then he just disappeared." Details shifted between tellers, as memories do. But the shape stayed the same. A black child, whose body had been treated as something between a miracle and a measuring cup, then scrubbed from the ledgers. In his working notebook, Simmons tried to stitch it together. Excerpts from Caldwell's journals, quotations from Lila, fragments of Freedmen's Bureau reports. He drafted an article for a small medical review about historic abuses in the treatment of Negro patients. An editor sent it back with red pencil through every specific place and name. "Too inflammatory for our readership," the note said. "Generalize." The published version, if you can even call it that, spoke only of a colored boy in a southern county long ago. No Reed, no Sunflower, no Mississippi State Medical Society. If you've ever worked with old files, church books, family trunks, you might know that feeling, stumbling on a half-erased story, seeing the outline of a person where someone else tried to leave only a smudge. If you have, I'd honestly like to hear about it in the comments. Those are the places where history still breathes. In a box labeled Unprocessed, H. Simmons, left in a university basement, there's a page that never made it to print. In the cramped hand of a man who'd read too much and could say too little, a single line curls along the margin. If we had his blood and his children's blood, we could ask whether this resistance stays in a family. At the time, it was just a private speculation. He had no way to test it, no budget, no DNA. But the question hung there anyway, waiting for a century that would learn to look for answers in the code of cells, and sometimes to repeat old patterns under a new scientific name.